Hey all, Mr. Bowman here. Today's learning objective is in green and we are learning to convert ratios of underlying ratios, but I'll circle it again, ratios to percentages, fractions, and decimals. So the first reason, or the first thing I want to discuss is why are we looking to convert it to percentages, fractions, and decimals? And the reason being is there is a whole vast realm of maths in relation to how can I use percentages, fractions, and decimals to solve problems. So if we can convert our ratios into those percentages, fractions, or decimals, we can then use those skills to solve problems. So before we start, the first thing we need to know is what exactly is a ratio. And when I think of a ratio, I think of two numbers. And those two numbers represent instructions to share something. They represent instructions to share. And I'm just going to write something in quote marks. That something may be apples, because I've got some pictures up here. It may be money. It may be chocolates from Halloween. Whatever it might be, you've got a large group of the same thing, and you're looking to divide it up. Something I do want to emphasize, I did mention that it was two numbers, but I do want to emphasize it can be three numbers or more, but typically you're going to deal with two number scenarios. So let's get into ratios and let's think about two people. The example I've got here relates to Alex and Ben. So Alex and Ben, they have gone apple picking. And what happened was Ben, maybe he slept in, maybe he left early, whatever it might have been. Ben ended up doing not as much work. And what we're going to say is we're going to say Alex did 2 times the work. So based on that, if Alex is doing more work than Ben, it'll be unfair for Alex and Ben just to divide it up evenly. In this case here, they had 10 apples. If they got 5 each, Alex might feel a bit upset about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to form a ratio based on that. So because Alex feels like he did twice the work, let's say we got Ben. So notice I've got Ben on this side here. If Ben gets 1 apple, how many apples would it be fair for Alex to get? And hopefully you're thinking the same as me. Because he did twice the work, it would probably be fair for Alex to get 2 apples. And that's what this ratio here means. It means for every 1 apple that Ben gets, Alex is going to get 2 apples. So if Ben got 4 apples, Alex should have got 8 apples. So the ratio itself, in this case, isn't going to be the focus of the video. It's going to be about, well, now that I've got a ratio, how can I convert that into percentages, fractions, and decimals? Because it is really important. I want fractions, percentages, and decimals because they're nice and easy to deal with. So let's start off with this here. We're going to have our ratio. And we've been told it was 2 to 1. And I'm going to drop this off here. Now, the easiest one to form here is going to be the fraction amount. And I'm going to chop this portion of our graph up into a little bit more detail. And we're going to say this here relates to Alex. And this here relates to Ben. Because Alex and Ben are going to have different amounts. So they need a different fraction. So when you're trying to find the fraction, what you need to do is you need to add up the parts of the ratio. So in our case, the denominator is going to be 2 plus 1, which will be equal to 3. So hopefully you can see I've got the denominator. I've left the numerator blank at this stage here. I'm just figuring out how many parts are there, and that's 3. And that's because for this to work, I need lots of 3 apples. That way, one of those apples can go to Ben and the other 2 can go to Alex. Now, because we're dealing with Alex, the numerator of the fraction is going to relate to the portion that Alex gets. So we can see here we had 2 apples and 1 apple. The 2 related to Alex. So that 2 is going to sit up the numerator, and it's going to sit on the numerator on this side over here as well. So what this means is Alex is getting 2/3 of the apples. 2 out of the 3 apples he's going to get. We're going to do the same for Ben. Again, we're going to add up the parts. So that's going to be 2 plus 1. And that there is going to get to 3. And of the bits we're adding up, the parts, the 2 and the 1, which of them relate to Alex? In this case, it's the 1. So which relates to Ben. In this case, it's the 1 because Ben slept in, whatever it might be, he doesn't get as much, which means he's going to get 1/3 of that. And I like these numbers here because if I add up 2/3 and 1/3, I've got 3/3, which is a whole. And that means all 3 apples, all 3 parts of our ratio have been distributed between Alex and Ben. So fraction, that's normally the best part or the easiest thing to form. Once you get a fraction, it is really easy to turn that fraction into a decimal. And decimals are useful, particularly if you're finding the portion of an amount. The decimals, because our fraction for Alex was 2/3, Alex's decimal is going to be 2 divided by 3, remembering division and fractions are kind of the same thing, so we can just put this in the calculator as division. And that's going to get me to 0.6667. And I've stopped at a 4 dp rounding in this case. We then can do the same for Ben. In this case, instead of 2, it's going to be 1 divided by 3 to reflect Ben's ratio or Ben's fraction. We've got 1 divided by 3, and that comes to 0.3333. And again, I'm stopping at a 4 dp rounding. So now that I've got the decimal, the very final piece of the puzzle is percentages. And the percentages, if you remember, it's going to be the decimal number times by 100. So we're going to go 0.6667. We're going to go times 100, and that's going to get me to 66.67%. And that's been affected by the rounding before. And then finally, we can do the same for Ben. We're going to have Ben's decimal, which is 0.3333. We're going to multiply that by 100, and that there is going to get me to 33.33%. So from our ratio, don't forget we started off our ratio over here, which was 2-to-1 apples to reflect the work between Alex and Ben. We're able to figure out, well, Alex got 2/3 of the apples and Ben got 1/3. We're able to figure out how much each of them get if it was a decimal number. And then finally, we're able to figure out, well, Alex gets 66.67% of the apples. And we're also able to figure out that Ben gets 33.33% of the apples. So hopefully in this video, you've got a good understanding of how we can convert ratios to fractions, decimals, percentages. And based on whatever one of those you've got, you can then use your ordinary fraction, decimal, percentage skills to solve problems. So that wraps up our video. Thanks so much for watching. Now let's get into heaps of practice.